This is an article from the Globe and not the Globe and Mail, Global News. Sorry, and I always mention the source because I don't want you guys to think that I'm taking this from like alt right, anti-union like sources or whatever, right? This is from Global News, and this is an opinion piece. Although it is an opinion piece, it's written by this guy named Andrew Lawton, who worked for the LCBO for years, and this article actually came out in 2017 and it was updated in 2021. So it's not a recent article. So it's not about the recent layoffs. It's about the LCBO from like a long time ago. And I don't know exactly what they updated on April of 2021. But maybe I'll assume that they updated like the figures and whatnot. But yeah, anyways, this was the case back in 2021, right? So you can assume that things have probably gotten even more egregious. But in just 2021, what Andrew Lawton of Global News said was that these, like, basically there was this website called Liquid Leaks or Licky Leaks or whatever, however it's pronounced, that proposes to share the real stories of life at LCBO of the workers, right? And it's just this, like, if you go on those website, it's all about like gripes that the employees have who don't really realize how good the situation is, or at least that's what Andrew said about this. And basically, like, what does he mean, right? So full-time customer service representatives, employees who work the floor at cash registers, earn as much as $57,000 per year. So I believe that the median Canadian income is right around 50K a year. It could be a little bit higher now, but again, this was updated in April 2021. So I would say that in 2021, 57K per year is for sure higher than the median Canadian income. So, just saying, they're just for a customer service representative, they're already making higher than the median income. And, to be honest, like, this is supposed to be a minimum wage job, right? If you, like, I know people don't like hearing that, and people think that it's like, I'm insulting them when I say it's like a minimum wage job, but let's be real here, right? I'm not trying to insult anyone. I'm just saying that, like, that is the case. And if you compare it to a McDonald's worker, let's say, I bet McDonald's workers don't make 57K even now, right? Never mind back in like 2021. But yeah, so this is one observation. And then there's another observation that Lawton claims, where it's practically impossible for the company to fire employees for being terrible at their job. So they can only fire them if they like broke a law or if they explicitly break a rule. But if they're just, kind of bad at their job in general, then it's like they don't get fired. Employees, but I mean, even like employees who break the rules, they aren't getting fired. Employees who are caught stealing alcohol aren't get fired, and in fact, they get alcoholism treatment. And this is funded by the LCBO and by extension, the Ontario taxpayer, right? So this is kind of like a problem that's been persistent at LCBO that the people who are on strike don't want to talk about. And then a second part of this story is somebody on Twitter. I think, because this is like a government position, right? Like LCBO workers. So when you're a government like worker, I believe there's laws in Canada that have to like publish how much money you make. Like, it has your name on it, and then like it publishes how much money you make, just to keep like kind of, it's a mechanism that we have, and it's really nice that we have this. It's a mechanism that we have to keep public workers accountable. And somebody went on the website and looked for how much these LCBO workers make and what their titles are. And as you can see, like, I almost like can't believe what I'm seeing. Some warehouse workers are making over 100K, and maybe they're like supervisors and they just didn't update their titles. So I'm like almost not willing to believe that they're just regular warehouse workers. And customer service representatives, again, like over 100K. I don't know if they're regular customer service representatives. Maybe they're supervisors. But even then, right? Like, 100K, I believe this would be like double what the median income is, right? So yeah, I mean, some of these customer service representatives are making six figures. So this is just kind of the problem that I wanted to bring up, where like we're already paying, and by we, I do mean we because we're the taxpayer and our tax dollars go to the LCBO, because the LCBO again is a government organization, right? So we as taxpayers are paying for this, and yeah, I just think it's rather ridiculous, right? That they're like asking for even more stuff, and asking for, the idea that they can't be fired or they can't be like laid off. And even when they're terrible at their jobs, they can't be laid off. Like they already have it really nice, right? And I know what you're gonna say, Tristan. It's like, just because one party has it nice, then like shouldn't we try to raise the working standards of like the minimum wage employees at like McDonald's to match that of LCBO, instead of trying to bring the LCBO people down. And my response to that is, I don't think we should be creating two classes of workers, first of all. And second of all, I don't think, quite frankly, that a customer service representative deserves to make 100K per year. Like, I'm sorry if that sounds cruel, but I just don't think that the value that they provide to society is worth 100K, right? I don't know if that's a controversial opinion that people would like downvote me for, but I'm going to say it anyways. I think that that's too much, and especially when it's taxpayer funded, then there needs to be accountability, right? If it's a private corporation, then I don't care, right? Like it's their own money; they can spend it however they want. But if it's a public organization, then I think if it's taxpayer funded, then I think that there should be some accountability. It's like, hey, are we paying these people too much, right? And in terms of bringing up workers, in terms of giving raises to like minimum wage workers of other sectors, we got to have an honest conversation about this, in my opinion, because there's only so much money, like there's only so much wealth in society, right? And there's only so many ways to allocate it. And quite frankly, I don't think our economy can afford to have McDonald's workers all make 100K a year. So I just think that that's unrealistic to suggest that like we should bring everybody up to the LCBO standard. So like there's got to be some give and take here, right? Like I'm not saying that like we shouldn't give raises to any minimum wage worker ever, but I think that if we were to like, if this is true that like we're paying warehouse workers and customer service representatives 100K a year, I think it's really unrealistic to bring up everybody who's working similar jobs to this level. So that's basically like all I had to say about that. I know, like Tristan, you're probably having a lot of thoughts right now on how you want to respond. So let me pass it back to you, and you can take it away.
Yeah, I've got some thoughts on this. So I would definitely like to push back on several items you mentioned here. For example, people making over $100,000 a year, and actually, scratch that. Before that, the idea that this is really taxpayer funded, I'm going to push back on that because this is a very profitable in portion of the Ontarian, uh, you know, like this makes money, right? And the fact that they're paying their employees more, I don't think that that is a sign necessarily of that they're overpaying. I think that it may be more of a sign that other companies are underpaying their roles. And again, I'm not necessarily saying that every customer service representative should be being paid $100,000. But I also don't think that that is the standard. I don't think that this is the average employee in LCBO is making $100,000. They're making more than the average for that kind of role, but they're definitely not making 100 grand by and large, right? These are niche cases. So I think the idea that someone who's running something with a lot of responsibility should be well compensated. So, for example, if these are like if this is like the head warehouse worker, like the supervisor or whatever at for the warehouse, I feel like that they should be highly or reasonably highly compensated, because if they are not compensated well and they don't do their job well, then my presumably my alcohol ability to buy alcohol is hampered, right? So I don't, and I understand that, once you're in, you kind of seem to be in. I don't agree that that should be the policy. I think that that's a clear issue with the LCBO in general. So if we kind of pan that off as like a problem that should be addressed, I think that the core of it, of like highly paid jobs, I think that I don't find that I can look at a job that I know nothing about and just say that they shouldn't be paid $100,000, right? Because I don't know what they're doing. I don't know how much stress they're under. I don't know how hard they're working. I don't know how many hours they're working, right? So, say for example, like if one of these warehouse workers, say he works 80-hour work weeks and he makes 100 grand. I mean, that's the same as a normal employee getting 50 grand for 40 hours, right? What's the difference from a perspective of like two employees making 50 grand, one employee making 100 grand? Like, it's really if the one employee is presumably doing more work. And so I don't think that the mentality should be that these people are making too much money per se. Um, and then in addition, I also want to push back on the idea that, McDonald's and them can't, or there's not enough money for them to pay their employees better. They can. They choose not to. We can see clear examples of ones where the management has decided to pay higher than average wages, such as like with Chipotle, for example, where there's much higher opportunities, or like in the States, there was the In-N-Out. Like, clearly these companies are still making money hand over fist, right? They're not choking on their higher labor costs. And again, the simple fact of the matter is that you pay more money, by and large, you get better employees. And you get lower turnover. If these McDonald's, etc., were better at maintaining talent and incurring talent, and by that paying them more, then maybe they would have less other expenses to counteract. And so it's just very much like I don't think that they I don't think that companies are choosing. I think that them choosing to pay minimum wage employees minimum wage is an active decision. I think that this is one where they're going, it costs less to manage the turnover and have worse functionality than it costs to pay our employees more to incentivize them to stick around. And I think because of that calculus, I think that means that the employees are paid less than what they should be paid. So, you may be arguing that you may be saying, looking at the LCBO and going, they're paid too much, but maybe they're closer to being paid what this role should be paid if you are attempting to maintain talent, right? And again, I understand that there's internal issues with LCBO where some of the talent is not very talented. I understand that it's not a perfect system, but I'm just saying that I really want to push back on the idea that you like every minimum wage employee is not created equal. There are ones who are definitely working and generating more than a minimum wage employee than another minimum wage employee, and that if we were to compensate them based on that, there would be a different scenario, right? It's just, again, the cheaper factor. And so I think that's kind of more so where I'm at on these. I'm mostly pushing back on on the compensation and that area, because I just don't think I don't think that they're necessarily being overpaid. I just, you know, I think that they are reasonably, and I mean, I could see an argument that maybe they're getting paid more than they would if it was a more privatized industry. But again, I think that that kind of also leans into the fact that the government seems to be more determined to keep employees, um, sometimes to their own detriment, but that they do seem to be more inclined to keep employees, um, than a company does, and because of that, their compensation tends to be, at least for this sort of role, tends to be a little bit better, or a lot of it better. Um, yeah, I think that's kind of the gist of what I'm thinking.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe let me push back on your pushback, right? So
Oh,
number one, I think what you mentioned about like the LCBO using like the profits to pay people, that part is coming out of the pocket of the taxpayer in the end anyways. And what I mean by that is because like LCBO is the government store and they run they run the store and they sell the alcohol, right? So they can either bake the tax into the price as a tax themselves, or they could like raise the prices of the alcohol, and then that's not a tax because we raise our prices. That's not a tax because the price just went up. But like they're baking in a profit for themselves. And like, is that a tax? Because like if it wasn't the LCBO, if it was someone else, maybe they'd be willing to sell the alcohol for a little bit less. And that money like would have like ended up somewhere else instead of the LCBO, right? But because the LCBO is a monopoly, like they get to raise their prices and then you have to pay it. So it's like they can get away with calling it a profit instead of a tax. But I think in the LCBO's case, those things are very similar. And the second point I want to push back upon is just, what you said about like, you don't think that they're overpaid. Well, obviously, I do think that they're overpaid. And the reason why I came to that conclusion is because I think you got to look at things relative to other jobs, right? So I know that maybe things are different now, but I know people who have graduated from computer science from University of Waterloo, where I went and where you went as well, Tristan. I know people who have graduated from computer science from the University of Waterloo or other similar tiered universities. Which, in case you guys don't know, Waterloo is kind of one of the most well-known universities in Canada for computer science and STEM fields in general, right? So I know people who have graduated from tier one universities in Canada that don't make 100K right out of that. They make like 60K per year right out of the gate, right? So I think that you got to compare like everything relatively. So maybe like if 100K is too much, how about like let's compare 80K, right? Let's just say like maybe these people that I showed in this screenshot, maybe they're like supervisors, or maybe they're just they have more responsibilities, or maybe they work longer hours, like you said, right? But let me just like kind of sandbag it a little. Let's just say they don't make 100K. Let's say they make 80K, right? I think they're still making a lot more than the average like worker in other positions at other companies. And I think there's no way that you can argue that they don't make more than comparatively similar jobs, right? And I think when you say that we should bring everybody up, maybe like McDonald's is underpaying people. I think we should compare like these LCBO salaries to not just like service jobs and retail jobs like at McDonald's and minimum wage jobs. We should compare it to like everybody, right? Compare it to software engineers. So like at 100K per year, I'm pretty sure a customer service representative at LCBO is making more money than a lot of software engineers. So I think this is just a fundamental imbalance that it's problematic. And what you said about like companies, they can make more, they can pay people more money, and they just choose not to. You brought up Chipotle versus McDonald's. Well, first of all, like, have you seen the prices at Chipotle, right? Like the customer is kind of subsidizing a lot of that. Like Chipotle is more expensive than McDonald's, even though McDonald's has increased their price by like magnitudes, right? Like I don't know, maybe you disagree with that, but like I don't know. Like every time I go to Chipotle, which is not very often because I don't like it's too expensive, right? I can't afford it. But like on the odd occasion I do go to Chipotle, I walk out feeling like I've been robbed because it's literally that expensive. And I don't get that feeling at McDonald's quite yet, but although it's getting there. So first of all, I would argue that McDonald's and Chipotle are like two different tiers, where Chipotle is kind of like a premium tier of fast food, whereas McDonald's, although their prices are going up, they're still aiming to be like the middle tier, right? So I think like maybe it's not like a apples to apples comparison to compare Chipotle versus McDonald's. So that's number one. And number two, there's it's a more complex reason why companies decide to pay a employee a certain rate than just like them, trying to like. Of course, they're trying to make the most amount of money possible, and they're trying to get the best deal possible. But at the same time, it's like, if like why is McDonald's so profitable? Why like they're making so much money? Why can't they afford to pay the workers more? Like that's kind of the fundamental argument of that argument, right? And I think that's it, it's more complicated than that because if your stock does well and you make a lot of money, you get more investors and you get more capital inflows into the company in the first place, where you can use that company. People are more willing to invest in your company because like they see how profitable it is. And then once people invest in your company, then you have more capital to work with and you can expand your operations and hire more people and build more stores. So it's like we like that like a lot of new stores might not exist if McDonald's wasn't as profitable as they are because they wouldn't get the investment, right? So it's kind of like their way of getting the snowball rolling. And in general, I think we can all agree that more jobs is better than less jobs, right? So if we're creating more, if McDonald's stores and hiring more people in general, like yes, maybe like we can argue that each individual employee is not paid as much as they should, but then we get more employed people in general in the grand scheme of things, right? So I think it's a little bit more complicated than just saying like, oh, McDonald's can pay their employees more and they just choose not to. Like, sure, I think that that is the case in some cases, but at the same time, it's like if you look at it from a company strategy perspective, it is very important for you to maintain a good balance sheet, a good income statement, so that you can attract more investors, so that you can grow your business, right? And if the business tanks because like you're just breaking even, or if you're like you're paying your employees so much that like you're not as profitable as your peers, right? Because you're also competing against like if you're McDonald's, you're competing against Chipotle, you're competing against other fast food places. If you're not as profitable as your peers, then like that could be a knock against you too. So I think there's a lot of like these kind of considerations on why this on why workers are paid the way that they do. But again, these my point is that these considerations the LCBO is exempt from because they're a crown corporation, right? They're a public taxpayer funded corporation. So then they can do whatever they want because it's like, who's going to tell the government otherwise, right? Like it's kind of like back in medieval times where you lend money to the king and the king doesn't pay you back. Like, what are you going to do? Right? Like you're gonna go to the king's palace and demand him repay you, like you'll get arrested, right? So I think this is kind of like a similar system that we've created with LCBO versus other retail locations, where other retail locations have to play by the rules of the market and they have to worry about attracting investors and all this stuff. And LCBO is just exempt from that, and then they can pay their workers a lot higher as a result. And then the workers are still unhappy and they go on strike, and again, this is why I'm like kind of frustrated, right? And why I call them fat cats. Again, this is not like an insult. I'm just trying to like call things as they are, in my humble opinion. And I'm sure you would disagree a lot with that, but let's hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think my stance is kind of relatively clear. I think that for this industry, I think that the LCBO existing in its format is acceptable. And for with regards to your comment about it being taxpayer funded, I mean, every like with regards to the fact that they can raise prices or whatever, and obviously the taxpayer is the consumer, but I mean, and that it's a profit that rather than a tax, but like in my perspective, um, I don't really see why that's a problem if it's a profit or a tax or either of those, because at the end of the day, um, that money is going to the to theoretically at least the infrastructure that will benefit everyone rather than just maybe lowering the cost of alcohol so I can get blitzed for $3 less every weekend instead of every other weekend, right? I think that's kind of my big gripe, is that it just lowering the cost of alcohol doesn't necessarily improve individuals' lives. I don't think that people who are the average person who's on like, or like the someone who's like super broke and they are only buying the essentials, realistically they shouldn't be buying alcohol anyway. So it's a way to charge people who are deciding to consume more, which is their decision, um, and have them fund stuff that will be affected by their own decision of consuming more and likely having a higher likelihood of causing a car accident and thus death and destruction of other people. So I think in my perspective, having people who choose to consume more pay more is not necessarily the end of the world in that front. And so I think that it's just really I'm really zeroing in on that aspect more so, I think. And whether or not they aren't paid too much or too little, it's very much, I think, I have a difficult time saying they should or shouldn't be paid more with no other detail than their job description, right? Because I think that there are several large key aspects to that can determine why someone is paid more, and that those aspects not being present mean that I have no idea if they're paying overpaid or even underpaid, right? Like, even if you have someone who's making $80,000 a year, if they're working like 80-hour work weeks, that's a pretty shitty salary, even at $80,000 a year, right? Like that's basically only a little bit over minimum wage. That's a 40 grand a year times two. So it's like and what's the difference between them working at two different companies to get that $80,000 or just working more at LCBO? We don't have we don't have enough details, I don't think, to really assess the rate of pay and whether or not it is too much money for them. And so I'm hesitant to call it out, especially given your very intent that they are overpaid. I just find it really hard to say. Like, if I were to take a truck, like, truck drivers are paid like a lot of money, right? But that's a shitty job. It's a lot of work. That's a lot of hours. That's away from your family. Like, there's a lot of expenses and work and lifestyle that is being sacrificed for that career. So I'm not going to go ever like look at the truck drivers and be like, they're paid too much. All they do is sit in a car and drive a little bit, because again, I can guess I can infer what they do, but what they actually do, I don't have any real perspective into.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be clear, I don't have a real perspective into this as well. I've never worked for LCBO, but I think there's some assumptions that you can probably draw, right? So, first of all, let me just remind you that this is a government job. So, if like, again, not to bash government workers, but if you go to uh, on Service Ontario, or I don't know what the equivalent is in Alberta, but like for our American friends, Service Ontario is like the DMV, right? So I've never been to a DMV, but I've heard of people who have gone, and I don't think that it's much better in Canada, or the Canadian version is not much better. But let's just say if you go to the DMV, right, and like you look at the efficiency of the workers there, you can probably, like, you're not the worker there, and you may have never worked for the DMV, so you can't say 100% for sure about anything. But I think you can make some pretty accurate assumptions as to like the efficiency of the workers, right? So that's number one. Number two, again, this is a unionized job, so I don't think that they're working 80-hour per week jobs. Or like, my base assumption when I see a job is that it's a 40-hour per week job. And I sometimes I'm right or sometimes I'm wrong, but I think for the vast majority of the time, that's a good assumption to make, that whenever I see a yearly salary, that's for 40 hours per week. Or even if it's a little bit more, even if it's, let's say, 45 hours per week or 50 hours per week, then I think that's still like an accurate or like a reasonable assumption. But I think that without like the burden of proof would be on you to prove that these guys are working 80 hours per week, because you're like kind of asserting something that's out of the norm, right? If you're saying that, oh, maybe like these people that are making 100K per year, they're actually working 80 hours per week. Well, it's like Occam's razor, right? Like, the simplest explanation is generally the most likely to be true. So without knowing any further knowledge, my kind of base assumption when I see a job is that this is a 40-hour per week job, and the salary just so happens to be 100K. Or in some cases, it's like this one person's making 127K.